Welcome. Welcome to our Care Month. And tonight we have two special people who are going to bring you things that you can work with your mind, things that you can work with your heart, and things you can work with your hands. So care comes in many forms: mental, spiritual, and physical. And we have a toolbox for you this evening. So I hope you enjoy our show. Lisa is going to introduce Ron and Don, our speakers this evening. It's all yours, Lisa.
Okay, so hi everybody. For those who do not know me, my name is Lisa Deegan, and I do this because I lost my brother John to ALS in 2018. So as you all know, that we've been focusing on care for the month of August, because anybody who's been on this journey knows that this is such a huge part of it. So I'm super excited to introduce our first speaker, Don Goewey. So in my conversations with Don, the takeaway has been how important his research-based work is for ALS patients and anybody who deals with stress. So a little bit about Don. He spent 6 years directing a think tank that was aimed at integrating breakthroughs in neuroscience and psychology. So from his work, he innovated a model for changing brain structure to extinguish stress reactions and amplify the higher brain function that enables a human to flourish. So organizations like Cisco and Wells Fargo have used Don's model to help people end stress in really high pressure workplaces. So Don's also an author. He's written Mystic Cool, The End of Stress. He also writes for the Huffington Post, and he's been on the Today Show, CNN, and NPR. So thank you, Don, for being here with us today to share your experience in working with so many ALS patients and caregivers and providing tools. So we can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, loud and clear, good. Well, a life-threatening illness is both a medical and a spiritual event. And, you know, not only for the person who's ill, but for the loved ones, for the caregivers as well. And a life-threatening illness is a mind-body event. And that means that your attitude matters. It matters a great deal. Your attitude can have a big effect on the outcomes, not only in how the medical treatment goes, but in terms of the spiritual well-being of the people involved, the spiritual well-being that everyone experiences. And by that I mean the joy and the peace and the happiness and the love that they experience as they go through whatever they go through that day, day to day. So stress travels in completely opposite direction. It creates the mind-body connection that works against us. Love creates the mind-body connection that works for us. It's very important to keep in mind. It's important to understand that stress is fear. Biologically, it takes some form of fear for the brain to set off a stress reaction. So for most modern human beings, the vast majority of what sets off a stress reaction is psychological fear. It's the way we human beings generate all sorts of stressful events purely in our head, producing upsetting emotions that imagine a threat that sends the mind and the body into an uproar. We don't want that. Psychological fear is the mind making up emergencies that the brain believes are real, so the brain sets off stress reactions. And when that becomes chronic, it means the stress response system is on nearly full time. It's dumping toxic stress hormones into our system. And these stress hormones debilitate, erode, they even damage our brain. They switch our emotional set point to negative, the opposite direction of the mind-body connection we want to go. It lowers our IQ by as much as 40%. It eliminates our EQ, our emotional intelligence. And when stress is chronic for any length of time, it locks the brain into these repetitive patterns of doing the same unproductive thing over and over again, blocking the creative insights that offer a better approach, a better result, a better solution. The greater the stress, the greater the likelihood of marital problems. Husbands and wives argue more. family dysfunction comes out of it. It has a detrimental impact on our health. It damages our cardiovascular system. It disables our chromosomes, which means our chromosomes start producing abnormal cells, leads to premature aging, and it impairs the immune system. All of this we don't want, obviously. You don't want that ever, and especially if you're sick. So it's important to be aware that stress is happening in us far more than it's happening to us, which means we can shift it. It's all a matter of attitude. And I'm sure everybody's been talked to about the power of attitude. So I'm going to give you my insights into it. And I think the best way of doing that is to tell you my own story, what happened to me 35 years ago, when my life was engulfed by what I call my perfect storm of stress. You know, I was working as an executive in the Department of Medicine at Stanford. But unfortunately, the chairman of the department and we did not agree. It's back in the days when I was sort of a young Turk. And we didn't agree on how to solve the department's problems. And after a couple of years of banging our heads together, he fired me. And I was married. I had 4 children. I had a nice house, big fat mortgage. I had everything anyone has, car payments, expenses that needed my salary. And so getting fired made my future look pretty frightening. And then 9 days later, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And it was, the doctors warned me that it could have a very serious impact on my life, especially the surgery. It was such a delicate surgery. It could disable me in a number of really unfortunate ways that would mean that I would never be able to work again. And so I found the best surgeon in the area, and he couldn't schedule the surgery for 6 weeks, which at first I thought was terrible. But the tumor was slow growing, so it wasn't a medical issue. I just wanted to get the thing over with. But it turned out to be a blessing. The blessing started off kind of rugged. You know, I was sitting around ruminating over the future, what was going to happen to my family. Every night, you know, was a dark night of the soul. I would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. This happened for every night for 3 weeks in a row. And I'd stare out the window into the dark, to the cold, dark night, and become terrified that I'd never be able to work again, afraid I was going to lose everything I built up in my life, afraid my family would become destitute. It was a possibility, and maybe even homeless. And then one night, after days and days of this, one of these breakdowns turned into a kind of breakthrough, as they tend to do. I reached a point where I questioned which was worse, you know, the dire problems that might happen to me in the future that I didn't have any control over, or the abject fear that was happening to me all day long, every day for 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. And the answer was clear. The fear was worse because it was present, very, very much in my face, and I could see how these fearful thoughts were painting me into a corner of this terrible gloom and doom that was really psychologically unbearable. And I could see that my painful state of mind was a result of believing my fearful thoughts. So for the next half hour, I committed myself to a basic process I had learned from Carl Rogers. I had the great fortune of working with Carl Rogers for a number of years. He's one of America's greatest psychologists and did an enormous amount of psychological research. And his process simply involved being aware of my fearful thoughts and my emotions, you know, how my fearful thoughts turn into my dire emotions, and to practice letting them go by first simply being aware of them, not being afraid of them, letting them be as they were, and then allowing them to pass. You know, one of the great truths in life is everything passes. And then once they had passed, this kind of space would open up in which I would realize I had a choice whether to believe that thought or not. I didn't have any crystal ball. It was a question of believing that fearful thought that was causing my suffering. It was very clear. I could see it. And, you know, of course, my ego would interject, would argue with me. It would say something, you know, like, whether you believe this fearful thought or not doesn't matter. You're still screwed, you know. But I just processed that fearful thought in the same way and moved beyond it. And to my relief, I actually began to calm down. The first time in maybe a month that I'd actually calmed down, felt some semblance of peace. And by the end of a half an hour of doing this, I actually was peaceful. The first peace that I'd felt in a long, long time. And, you know, when I looked out that window that when I, you know, had been looking out for every night into the doom, what I saw outside had actually changed. The cold, dark night turned out to be quite beautiful. The moon was shining. It was glimmering on the trees, and it had a feeling of almost being sacred. And I realized that the only thing that actually had changed was not the moon or the trees or the light, but it was me that had changed, and my experience had changed. And so I made the decision right then and there to work at letting go of fear, letting go of stress, and to be at peace as I faced whatever I had to face that day in this very simple way of not being afraid of being afraid, of allowing that content to come up, of letting things to be as they are, especially emotions to be as they are, and to let them pass and to watch as they pass, and then to make a choice to be at peace. And I discovered that choosing to be at peace wasn't as hard as I thought. Stress was hard. Fear was hard. Peace actually made everything for me easier, clearer, calmer. And, you know, when I returned to work, I had to return to work. You know, I had a severance package that made me have to go back and finish up some projects. And you know, I had been worried about that because of all the stressors. I didn't want to add more stress to the stress that my mind was already creating for me. But what I found as I did this practice is that those usual stressors that were at work, they didn't get to me. I was even friendly to people I used to perceive as my enemies. You know, I didn't want my head filled with grievances. I wanted to give my head every chance to heal. And, you know, I worked right up to a week before the surgery. And during that entire time, as I recall, I did not entertain one fearful negative thought. I had them, but I didn't indulge them. I didn't get stuck in them. I didn't let them take over. And the outcome of this was astonishing. I actually was presented at Stanford Grand Rounds because the outcome of that surgery should not have happened. It was a complete success. It spared me a life of disability. And, you know, if neuroscience knew back then, and this is back in the late 80s, if it knew then what it does, what it knows now, what it has actually established as fact now, is that shift in attitude that I went through from fear to peace, from stress to greater calm, to making my well-being and happiness matter every single day, that established the mind-body connection that gave me the best possible, the best opportunity for a really good outcome. And I got that. And the other interesting thing that happened was I got my job back. Not in that department, but someone in the Department of Psychiatry came to visit me, the chair of the Department of Psychiatry. He'd heard about this guy who was, you know, down and out and about to face surgery, who had this great attitude that, you know, I guess people were talking me up. And he offered me a job. He said he wanted that attitude on his team. None of this would have happened if I had not made that shift. You know, 40 years of research in cognitive therapy has established that all of our moods are produced by the thoughts we believe, and that determines how we see the world. and how we see our future. And that turns into what we expect will happen. You know, our mood and expectation, they are profoundly influencing one another. They influence what actually happens, meaning we actually get what we expect to get. It's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy that wires into our brain, into our body, into our lives. Research at Harvard has found that expectation plays a much greater role in shaping our lives than they previously thought. They're actually pretty astounded by it. Well, years ago, I knew a woman whose expectation influenced the course of her cancer. The cancer was very aggressive, and the prognosis was considered highly unfavorable. And yet, when her oncologist delivered the bad news, the woman misheard him. She left the office thinking that what he had said to her, it was that her chances were highly favorable. And so over the course of her treatment, her mindset, her belief, her expectation was built on the expectation of complete remission, which is exactly what happened to her. At that time, her medical chances were 9% of surviving. And it wasn't until her case was presented at a conference, she was sitting in the audience, they were presenting her case, she discovered she heard her doctor wrong. And she's actually a famous Bay Area poet now. And she told me, she said, if I had heard the doctor correctly, I probably would have died. So it's so important we seize hold of this power that's within us. And we work with the medical establishment and all the wonderful things that they can do for us, but we also focus in on all the wonderful things we can do for ourselves through our own spirit, through our own heart, through our own mind. And one of the things to get this started is starting each day on a positive note with a positive belief. It's very important. It's as simple as waking up each morning and giving thanks for another day of life. It's never guaranteed. You folks know that as well as anybody. Give thanks for another day to be with the ones we love, to cherish that. Thanks for the love in our hearts. It's so important to do this, and it creates the expectation for something good to happen. For something good to happen in the short term, that day, and something good to happen in the future. People who do this, the research shows that they experience more positive emotions during the day. They actually sleep better at night. They feel more connected with the people they're with. All of those are mind-body connections that you want to cultivate. You know, otherwise, stress and pessimism take over, which can never empower a higher expectation, a higher outcome. You know, the mind-body connection is a medical fact. It has an impact physically. Not to forget psychologically and spiritually. It's so important to keep our attitude clear. If people's attitude is clear, everything will go better. Everything has a much better chance. That means letting go of worry. You know, they did a study at Cornell University. They had people write down their worries every day for a month. And then at the end of it, they had them go back and determine which one of their worries happened. And what the data showed, it was a large study, what the data showed, that 85% of what people worried about never happened. And when I give that information at a keynote, someone always raises their hand and says, yeah, but what about the 15% that does happen? Well, they actually investigated that, and they found that 78% of the people where their worry actually manifested, they found out that they resolved it much better than their initial fear told them that they would resolve it. They worked it out. They found a solution. That means letting go of worry is letting go of illusion and making those moments. It's also really important of marking moments when something beautiful happens, when something, it could be a sunrise, it could be a child, you know, innocence of a child that comes through that always warms our hearts. All these little small ordinary things to mark the moment when something beautiful happens. It's about letting go of the future, leaving the future to the future and being present as often as we can, coming into the present moment. Now is the only time there is, and we miss this moment, we miss our life. It's about forgiving the past. It's all of these spiritual values that set the mind-body connection. And, enjoy, it just boils down to enjoy everything you can while it is there. Be happy as often as possible. Next to love, happiness is the most powerful form of the mind-body connection. So lean into happiness, especially in the middle of what you're all going through. We think we need to acquire happiness for something to work out for us to be happy, when in fact it is our natural state. Science has determined that. When science wants to see what's our natural state, they look to children. Children are naturally happy until, we program them out of it. All you have to do is drop false beliefs about happiness, and happiness will arise all by itself. And the biggest false belief is that without this thing or that person or this outcome turning out the way I want it to turn out, I cannot be happy. When you're depressed or anxious, the cause is that you believe life is not giving you what you've convinced yourself you cannot be happy without. Watch how that happens. There's not a single moment in our lives when we don't have everything that we need to be happy. The reason why we're unhappy is because we're focusing on what we don't have rather than on what we have right now. So don't wait for happiness to happen in the future. Right now, right here, you're happy. Know it. Recognize it. And as you do that, you will be putting your mind and your body in that wonderful connection that leads to all of these promising results, not only at the level of your medical condition, but at the level of your spiritual condition, the level of your family condition. This is an opportunity for people to come closer and closer and closer together instead of farther and farther apart, which is what fear does. Fear drives us apart. Love brings us together. And this is a time to lean into love. And the medical evidence is, if you do that, you'll be in touch with one of the greatest healing sources in this world, establishing that connection that you need for healing. So that's my my pitch.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
And
nice.
thank you very much, Don. That was very insightful. And we'll go on to the next presenter, and we'll come back to you, Don, with questions. So the last part is going to be Q&A session. So please, anybody have questions, please put in the chat, so we'll go into the question and answers with Don. But next we'll move on to Ron Hoffman here. And, Ron Hoffman was introduced to us by Jonathan Greenfield. And we take pride in this becoming truly a community, what we're bringing together, because we want everybody to share the experiences you've had. And Jonathan Greenfield had great experience with working with Ron Hoffman and his team. And today, Jonathan and Jeremy Stallman, who is his nephew, is going to give an introduction on behalf of Jonathan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeremy. I'm John's first cousin. I learned shortly after John's diagnosis that I also carry the C9 gene. So I want to thank you all for welcoming me and John. And with that said, I'm going to read John's introduction of Ron. On December 20th, 2018, Dr. Leo McCluskey at the University of Pennsylvania said to me, "You have ALS. Like it was for you, it was a shock. I had suffered foot issues since late 2017 and trained and raced my ass off in triathlons throughout 2018, nursing a stiff right foot the whole way. I live in Connecticut and went to McCluskey as my father, a doctor himself, told me that he was the best EMG doc he's ever known. I went to him believing I had L4, L5, S1 issues. My father died in 2015 from ALS. Dr. McCluskey mumbled something like, "It's your genes." I happened to be looking down at my $185 jeans, I buy a pair every year, and slapped my hand down on my thighs and said, "My jeans, these cost me $185. No way it's my jeans." My stab at humor was lost on him, a serious man. I left, and the next day I called MGH and haven't looked back. In February 2019, Dr. Katie Nicholson tested me for the C9 gene, and in April of that year, learned that I'm a carrier. I had never previously heard of CCALS. In June of 2019, I was invited to crash a dinner in Westport, Connecticut by Carol Hamilton of ALS TDI. She was at a dinner party with Patty Haberstraw and her amazing family, the family who created the ALS Pepper Challenge, which raised a lot of money for ALS research. And Chris Curtin of CCALS happened to be there too. Patty went on and on about how wonderful Chris and CCALS has been for their family. I was like, cool, but I was still far away from needing their help. But Chris and I quickly bonded over triathlon, and he even committed to come to my Wim Hof workshop the following weekend, which was cool as he mentioned that it was well outside his wheelhouse. My mother and sister happened to be at that workshop, and after breathing ourselves to outer body experiences and plunging in an ice bath, we all headed to our town beach for a barbecue. There, my mother, after learning of CCALS, started peppering Chris with how CCALS could help my older brother in California. He was also suffering with ALS and having a dreadful time with his care. Chris happened to be soon on his way to California and promised to start making calls. He visited them, and he, along with Ron Hoffman, have since helped them in extraordinary ways unique to their situation. As Breathe for ALS was formed, I began to study CCALS. The more I learned, I loved and wish we had known about them when my father was suffering. I wanted to get to know Ron and connect our mission to teach every ALS patient and caregiver who wanted to learn how to breathe with CCALS. But Ron was like, slow down, let's get to know each other first. I happened to be traveling to MGH the following week, and we made a plan to meet in Falmouth at the CCALS Healed Center. During the call, he mentioned his autobiography, Sacred Bullet, Transforming Trauma to Grace While Tending to the Terminally Ill. I ordered it before hanging up. 2 days later, the book came. I tore into it and couldn't put it down. It's a troubling yet inspiring story of a boy turned man who has made it well past the pitfalls that trap individuals who, like him, survived a difficult childhood. Read it. I promise you, it will inspire you and teach you more about proper caregiving than you ever thought about. You'll even learn tricks, like how to get a condom catheter on, something I've struggled with lately. The next week, we met and bonded right away. If you mention Ron to other ALS families, you'll get a smile, and they'll say how grateful they are, and they love him. But might add with the smile, he's a little strange, no? I always find this hysterical. Some just don't get how far this man has traveled, both within and out. The personal healing quests Ron has embarked on are epic and have made him wise. If Ron is strange, he's my kind of strange, and I love him for it. For years, he's gone on vision quests in the desert. He's done meditation with this one and that one. He's done the work many of us are embarking on now to heal from ALS. I respect and love him for it. That's why I believe we clicked right away. Ron speaks directly and honestly to me and my wife. There's no pretense, just solid counsel and an interest to help. And let me tell you about their help. In April of this year, I landed in a wheelchair, and recently my speech disappeared. And I've needed help, CCALS's help. And they have been there for everything. Chris Curtin took me to my wheelchair appointments and advocated for me. How the hell do I know what to order? What I'll need? CCALS knows. And they also know everyone in the industry, which helped when my power chair was delayed due to the paperwork jam. Ron made one call and the jam was cleared and chair ordered. CCALS gets things done. I could go on and on about their equipment closet, but CCALS is about the people and the mindset of a true caregiver. They can feed and shower you, but their mission is to support you and your care team in the home and advocate for you on your appointments. Their phones ring nonstop. Each one of their caregivers supports upward of more than 100 families. They live in their vans servicing these families 7 days a week. I could go on and on. Like last week when Ron drove 3 hours south from his home in Falmouth, Massachusetts to Westport, Connecticut, hours before Isaias tore through our town and left us homeless for a week with no power, to tour our new home and counsel us on ramps, doorways, and bathrooms. His suggestions are really saving us circa 15 grand from what we thought we'd have to spend. When he says he's coming, he shows up, despite the threat of a hurricane. And it goes without saying that Ron attended a community Breathe for ALS Wim Hof workshop weeks before COVID affected all of our lives. And he plunged for close to 5 minutes in his first ice bath ever, outside in 33-degree air. I have the video for proof. I want to beat ALS, and guess what? Ron and his team of caregivers are supporting me in those efforts. But this may be my last dance, and the experience of ALS my final lessons, and that's okay. They support my effort to die well too. Read the book. Ron and I have communicated about death in a deep way. We connect on that possibility. There's nothing he and his team haven't heard of or seen. They've been present to everything under the sun and have lost their dearest and best of friends. I'm honored to introduce this special man. He's a brother from another mother for sure. Like a big brother I always wanted. Let's hear how Caregiving chose him, because he certainly wasn't looking for it. All he was doing was helping his friend Gordon, and that experience changed his life and gave all of us the gift that is CCALS.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Jonathan. Wow. Yeah, I love you, Jonathan. Indu, Lisa, McFinn, Michelle, thank you for doing what y'all are doing. It's beautiful how you're able to gather people. The last thing Don said was lean into love. And I couldn't agree more. And on the same hand, I say, lean in to living with ALS. You know, when we resist, when we're angry, you know, our body tightens. You know, it's important to really recognize that. We have all the answers we need that are in our body. Our body tells us everything we need to know. And what I've tried to learn to do, and what my team is trying to learn to do, is really feel into what it is that they're actually feeling when we're visiting families. Maybe something comes up for us. Whenever I go into a family, I've really learned to leave my baggage at the door, to go in very, very clear and clean. And my hope is all of you, my invitation to you is to expect that for whoever you're working with in your care team, from whatever agencies, whatever clinic. Don't allow people to project what they think you should be doing. Okay? So I've been doing this for a long time now. I'm going on 23, 24 years. I was a caregiver for Gordon Hill back in 1997. Gentleman I worked part-time for. I had no training in this. I come from an interesting life experience. I'm going to speak in a bit, in a few minutes, about the art of showing up, which is something that's never left me, showing up. As a little boy, you know, we all have a story. Each of you, all of us have extraordinary stories. And along the way, it's important we share those stories. You share them with your family, with your children. But what informed me, and it never left me my entire life, as a boy of 10, my mother and I were rushed to the hospital. And, you know, she was almost killed. I was almost killed. This is in my book. But as I got to the hospital and they were rolling me in on a gurney, this is 1963, 64. There was an African-American, a young fellow. I'm assuming because of that time, he was an orderly. But as I was being rolled into the hospital, I felt a hand literally on my heart. And I looked up and I saw this gentleman. And he said to me, "Ronnie, I heard about you on the radio, you know, on the two-way radio. I'm here." And I have never thought, I had never felt more supported and more seen in my 10 years of life. I knew there was something very special about him and that someone was actually showing up for me. So that's literally has stayed with me my entire life. Not that I had a lot of awareness around it. But when I became Gordon's caregiver in 1997, you know, it kind of reared its head, the ability to show up for someone. And, you know, all that that means. So anyway, Our work at Compassionate Care is about tending to and caring for individuals navigating the complexities of living with ALS. We offer physical, emotional, and spiritual support. Our caregivers are equally as important as individuals living with ALS. So our work is about, as I said, tending to and caring for the entire family, the community, healthcare professionals, etc. Gordon actually became the most important teacher I actually ever had. And his journey with ALS to this day was probably one of the more extreme situations I've come across. And yet Gordon was a man who made his choices by never ever making them. He made his choices by never making them. In other words, he'd wait until something happened and decide then. I mean, we never talked about feeding tubes. We never talked about invasive ventilation. Not that I knew that much about it in 1997. But to this day, I really honor him because that was his path. You know, I've learned to, and my team has learned to truly honor where people are, because as I'll talk about in a bit, you know, people make different choices. And I really want to talk about choices. You know, as we were living with ALS, and what really piqued my curiosity, and when I said, you know, I need to do something. As we were living with ALS, we were figuring it out alone. I was his full-time caregiver. Gordon was 6'4". His wife, Betsy, was maybe 3 feet high. And as we were living with ALS and figuring it all out, he, you know, we would get information from, at the time, there were only 2 organizations, Muscular Dystrophy and the ALS Association. And we would get information from them and get information from the clinics, and we would read it. And respectfully, I'm being very respectful here, we would read it, look at each other and tear it up. You know, it just didn't seem relevant to the experience we were living. And right then I said, there's no book that can tell you how to do this. You know, there's not a list. A lot of people like lists. We don't do lists. You know, a list might work for you. It might not work for you. Again, the uniqueness of this disease, even when there's common diagnosis, as you well know, can look incredibly different. Anyway, so our work is an incredibly relational model. That's what we created. It's about relationships. Sometimes people might say yes to this. Sometimes they might say no. You know, some families we're intimately involved with where the doors are wide open. And sometimes, thanks for the ramp, we'll call you if we need you. So it's uniquely different. It's individualized support. And in my opinion, there's not any aspect of living with ALS, there's not something that we're able to bring to the table. A lot, but not all of what we do is, you know, accessibility is important, obviously. I mean, we help people with ramps. If we have the materials, we give them. If we don't, can we do a rental program? I've got incredible vendors I've been working with for years and years and years that treat our families incredibly well. We have a van program where we're able to loan vans to individuals. We give folks rides to a clinic, whether it's for research or maybe sometimes people just need a ride. I have a government affairs liaison and social worker who help people navigate the world of Medicare, Medicaid, disability insurance, which is such a huge piece, as you all know. I mean, there's nothing more complex. I mean, the bureaucracy of healthcare sometimes gets in the way of solid care. We have DME, durable medical equipment, incredibly high-end stuff that we're often able to give to families. You know, if we don't have it and we don't have the money, we can get things wholesale. So we don't charge for what we do. I mean, that is one of the few times that any money changes hands. If somebody wants this, I don't have it. Well, we'll buy it. I say, well, wait, I get it wholesale. And, you know, with installation of ramps, et cetera, you know, we're able to often cover the installation for families if they're unable to. And then, of course, there's grief and trauma support and counseling. I mean, it goes on and on. I don't know what it is that we don't do. I'm sure there's something. And I think that's one of the things that makes us uniquely different than other care organizations, ALS or otherwise. And, you know, many do a few things we do. We do a great deal that they don't. You know, meeting people like Jonathan, it just reminds me of why, you know, I actually do this work. You know, our families do not have to, you do not have to recreate the wheel. Our families don't have to recreate the wheel. And yet oftentimes we're incredibly alone, because there's no way that there's no way I can know how you feel. And I'm sure along the way, many people have said to you, I know how you feel. Or people are wanting to fix things for you. No one knows how any of us feel. And again, even if there's commonality, you know, and that's where stories are really, really important. And meeting in groups like this in an appropriate way to be able to share what we know or to have someone to ask questions. So again, I've been doing this a long time. And, you know, Jonathan mentioned the Healed Center, which is something that I was dreaming of for 18 years and we were able to create. It's an education retreat sanctuary for individuals living with ALS and for caregivers. So it's on our website. Please check it out. We raised $3.45 million to build this place. But literally, it was a dream that I had when I first started working with Gordon. When they allowed me to have a family come for a weekend in their summer house. And I saw how meaningful that was to this family. So it's a huge accomplishment that we've had. I've got an incredibly close partnership with Mass General Hospital. Merritt Shakovitz, who you saw several weeks back, I've known Merritt since 1997. Merritt was Gordon's neurologist. And so we go way back, and over the years, she has referred many, many people, and we actually have a house call program with MGH that I'm incredibly proud of. As an independent nonprofit, being in print with MGH says it all. They send a nurse practitioner or nurse into our families' homes with one of my team. And that's for the Boston area. It's a long story how we came to that, but it's an extraordinary program. And a lot of people have been taking notice of it through MGH, you know, letting other clinics know this is what's happening. And for years and years, we're in the homes. And of course, they're referring families to us years and years, you know, prior. And we'd be advocating for families. I'd call up, I'm calling about Mr. Jones, Ron, we can't talk to you because of HIPAA. And of course, my response is, well, you referred him to us. Hello. So now, due to the house call program and our partnership with ALS One, who is an incredible organization that raised lots of money for research and care, and we are their care component. The founder, Kevin Gosnell, was someone I met, and he was thinking about doing this. And so anyway, we connected. So they continued to support our work, and I'm incredibly grateful to that. We work with families all over New England, New York, New Jersey, upper Atlantic states. We've worked with families in around 39 states around the country, got families in California, in many countries around the world. You know, I still haven't learned to say no. So I invite you to reach out to us, but I need to say, we can only do what we can do. We have 600 families right now. We have worked with nearly 3,000 people since I've been doing this. So we've seen a great deal. The finest asset that we have, the finest asset that I have is my team. They're extraordinary people who do extraordinary work in the world. And it's truly about showing up, listening, being present, and taking it from there. What needs to happen? The first thing I tell families, the first thing I would tell you is, I'm not here to tell you what you don't want to know. And oftentimes I'll go, well, why are you here? And of course, my friend John Imber said, well, Ron, I want to know everything, which I went, beautiful. We started with accessibility. But this person over here, thank you, Ron, I don't want to know anything. Like Gordon, who made his choices by never making them. Most people are somewhere in the middle. So the art of language is so, so important. It truly, truly is. And so I invite you along the way, if you have people in healthcare coming into your homes or anyone in the care business, if they're talking about things that you are not ready to talk about, you have permission, you got my permission anyway. I don't want to go there right now. All right, because sometimes that still happens. It's unfortunate, but it does. One of the things I learned, I wish I'd have done it a long time ago, is getting support from my team. None of us can do this alone. None of you who are caring for your loved ones, and some people try. And in actuality, I've seen people do it alone, but I've sometimes seen caregivers who, metaphorically speaking, became beaten, battered, and bruised, and also losing their identity. Seen it. And yet I've learned to honor it, because there's a point where it's not my business. You know, all of our families have their own unique stories. In some families, there's incredible dysfunction. We see a lot of families. There are a lot of difficult stories out there. Yet at the same time, there are an equally number of incredibly beautiful stories and how people navigate the complexities of living with ALS. I think the biggest question that comes to mind for me, and the question that I like to share with people, it's like, my hunch is, when you were diagnosed, for those of you who are diagnosed with ALS, I mean, to me, in my opinion, that's an incredibly traumatic experience. And oftentimes you're left to your own device to go out in the waiting room and wait and, you know, leave. But there's no real support there. And to me, you know, I recognize that with Gordon. I mean, here we are. What do we do? Where do we go? And in my perfect world, we'd be in clinic in a room next door where we can come in and kind of debrief and just allow people to realize that they're not alone. There's someone that's willing to walk with you along the way. So the big question is, how do we learn to live our lives in a different way? That's the challenge. You know, Don was talking about anxiety and stress. Well, that's part of receiving that diagnosis. Along with the fact of receiving that diagnosis is, for many people, a lot of the old woundedness comes up. You know, I think we all have some trauma residing in our bodies, because as human beings, oftentimes we don't know how, and we weren't brought up knowing how to allow it to dissipate, you know, like the animal kingdom. And so, you know, it's really important to have that type of support. And, you know, I finally learned, I was finally able to get my staff support, because we see things day in and day out. You know, our work is about enhancing quality of life, when invited, exploring end of life. Because in reality, ALS or otherwise, at some point we'll all be gone. And I'm a huge advocate of people finding their path, doing their work, whether it's in research and trying this. I've had people try all sorts of things. And people will often ask me or my team, what do you think? And to me, it's about following your intuition, gathering information, making a conscious choice, a wise choice. You know, so that's all part of the art of showing up, the art of listening, when we can truly listen to one another, okay? Truly listen. When we have our gatherings, I don't call them support groups, but when we have gatherings, it's based in sitting in council, where we're actually listening to one another. And here's a talking stick or a heart stone. You know, Charnel's got the floor, she's got the stone. And when we're listening to one another, oftentimes there can be a recognition, maybe. And there's the opportunity for one's authentic self to emerge when we're truly listening to another human being, where we're bearing witness to them. And when the authentic self can emerge, because I've seen it time and time again, people dropping into places and sharing and speaking of, whoa, they've never gone there before. But when the authentic self can emerge, then there's the opportunity for one's vulnerable self to show up. And to me, there's nothing more important than that. And when that vulnerable self shows up, if there's emotions or tears, it's important to allow those emotions and tears, let them flow. What inevitably happens often is people want to hold somebody or pet them or hand them Kleenex. You know, you'll never see me hand someone Kleenex. I love tears. Tears are important. Feelings and emotions are important. Hence, the ability to communicate with one another is incredibly important. And yet, it can also be incredibly hard. You have a person living with ALS, you have caregiver. And in the very most loving relationships and caring relationships I've ever seen, it still gets really, really hard. And sometimes it's just hard. And yet, how do we continually navigate that? In regards to communication, there's nothing more important to me than your children, okay? And in all the years that I've been doing this, I've got some families where when I met them, the children were 6, 7, 9, 10. They are now in their mid to late 20s, okay? And in my experience, the children who were involved with mom or dad's care, involved with appropriate language, you know, daddy's got a bad back, whatever it is, you know, appropriate language for a child. That the children who are involved and are allowed in, their maturation soars. I've seen it time and time again. Just as I've seen children whose parents or family has kept them out of the loop, so to speak, pretending like nothing's wrong. And in those circumstances, I've seen later in life, there's difficulties. So again, it's just language appropriateness. You know, the families that can communicate, share feelings and emotions, in my experience, are the families who are able to navigate in a more fruitful way, you know? Everything we do is an invitation, all right? And I've always learned to ask permission if I'm going to ask a question that I think that I'm not sure about. It's kind of like, you know, can I ask you a question? Sure, okay. And because sometimes subject matter is pretty difficult. And again, I'm not here to tell you what you don't want to know. We allow folks to guide those conversations. So one of the commonalities you all have, those living with ALS, or along the way, there's many choices to be made. Choices, possibilities, and potentialities, okay? And I learned this long ago from a buddy of mine who had a feeding tube. I'm going back probably 20 years, early in my career. He had a feeding tube, and back then, you went home the same day. So this gentleman went in for a feeding tube, went home, and his wife, sweet lady, but I knew from the get-go, did not have the capacity to care for her husband. It just wasn't there. Everyone doesn't have the capacity as a caregiver to do what needs to be done. And we truly, hopefully, can learn to honor that. Anyway, I got a phone call. All hell broke loose. He had a problem, was rushed back to the hospital. Chaos ensued. They had to keep him for 2 days. Ever since that time, they started keeping people over here in Massachusetts. That was the thing that started that. But that informed me when he called me up and said, Ron, why didn't somebody tell me that could happen? I went, great question. Why didn't they? So from that moment on, I started, when I'm with families, talking about those choices, those possibilities, when they bring them up. So if I'm speaking with someone and they're talking about their swallowing, I'm curious, well, what did your doctor say? And they'll share with me. And then would you like to know what I know? I'm asking permission. I'm not just telling them. And most times, sure. And I'm not attached. My team is not attached to any choice that you made. If I'm attached to anything, it's that you have all the information you wish to have in order to make a conscious choice. Regardless of the choice, what is true is that there are ramifications and consequences for those choices. So God forbid you have a feeding tube and something happens and, oh, wait a minute, I remember talking about that. My point is it's not as traumatic if we're willing to educate ourselves. It's just like people who are doing different research type things. It's about educating yourself. What does this look like? So my good friend, John Imber, who is considered the finest painter in America, John's been gone about 6 or 7 years, finest contemporary painter in his day. And I remember meeting John the first time. We immediately connected, and I said, I'm not here to tell you what you don't want to know. He said, Ron, I want to know everything. And he was very clear he didn't want a feeding tube. Down the road, he changed his mind already. But as we were engaging one another over a couple of years, he would call me up, Ron, I need some color. He's a painter, so he dealt with colors. Color being a metaphor for information. What will this look like? That's one of the things that we're able to do when invited. This is what it can look like. This is what's possible. Okay? These are the potentialities. And I think it's incredibly important. We're able to go places sometimes where our doctors can't go. And it's not because our doctors aren't nice people or don't have good hearts. It's just many of them, the training they come from, it's just not there. It's changing a bit now. And of course, for many doctors, nurses, people in healthcare, quite frankly, even in the world of hospice, it's about being familiar, becoming familiar with the reality that we're all mortal. Again, ALS or otherwise. And there's opportunity to explore that. So again, another thing, if I'm attached to anything, it's about bringing calm guidance and awareness into people's lives. Calm guidance and awareness. You all deserve that. My first, I think it was when Merritt was speaking, I was scanning to see who was here because it was my first experience, with this group. And I started seeing all these individuals and families. And my heart was sinking. Again, no one should have to do this alone. And it's truly important that we honor what people are. Along the way, there's endless changes. How do you, there's new norms all the time. How do you do this? Again, how do we learn to live life in a different way? There's always a new normal. Self-inquiry I found to be incredibly important. It gets on to what Don was talking about earlier. Self-inquiry. Because again, oftentimes a lot of our woundedness is coming in. And if we can sometimes dig deep, if we can find the right type of support, there's incredible opportunity for healing here. I've known some people who have been incredibly transformed through their ALS experience in a very positive way. And I look at McFinn and his experience. And it's just like, whoa. I've also known people, I was talking to McFinn the other day. In the last couple months, I've met 2 or 3 people who actually were misdiagnosed. They had a neurological, it just wasn't ALS. There's oftentimes other, close cousins and things can mimic it, I guess. So hope is incredibly important. Getting counseling or therapy, but it's all about finding the right person. And if you do not connect with that person, it's a waste. We have to connect. Again, I learned, not too late, but to give my team that type of support around grief and trauma and, what we see day in and day out. It's incredibly important. Again, feelings and emotions, recognizing your inner terrain, what's going on, truly feeling what you're feeling. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be happy. It's okay to find joy amidst the chaos in which we're living, especially now with COVID-19. We've had to learn to do our work in completely different ways, yet we're doing it. In some ways, we've never worked harder. the somatic experience, feeling into your body what's going on. Again, I believe with all my heart, my body can inform me on everything that's going on if I have the willingness to listen and feel into it. And sometimes the courage to explore what's possible. And then I learned a long time ago, easier said than done. My dear friend Tom Daly, who to me is one of the finest psychiatrists in the country, he's got an incredible model of work that he created. And I was working with him long ago, going through one of his programs. And he talked about, can I, meaning me, step outside my body, go to the other side of the room, and look back at myself, at what's going on in the moment, whether I'm with this other person or I'm by myself. But can I watch my own movie? Interesting concept, but it actually really, really works. Faith is incredibly important, I have found. Hope is incredibly important. Whether it's your church, your religion, connecting with source, maybe it's nature. And one of the things that is very important to me is actually reaching out and asking. And I had to remember to do this, okay? Because a lot of it gets lost. But reaching out to those who've gone before, meaning my great-grandparents, you know, the ancestral piece, because we all come from a long lineage. Every man in here has many men standing behind him. All you women have women standing behind you whose blood runs through your blood. And if you believe in spirit, as I do, I know that I'm not alone, but I learned that I needed to ask for that support before it would ever show up. And I learned that for me, it's true. As a boy, I remember the Bible, Moses talking to God, God talking to Moses. Again, I was a kid. What does that mean? Was it a booming voice? No, it wasn't a booming voice. But for me, it's an intuitive piece. It's a feeling, it's a sensation. You've seen the cardinal run by, you've seen the butterflies, you might have seen something. To me, all that is real. So I really invite you to find your way. You know, when we're traveling, we all have guides. You know, we have guides and angels and, you know, those who've gone before us. We just need to ask them to come in. And in what we do at Compassionate Care, in many ways, we are guides, just helping guide people along the way. So this woman is Mariah Fenton Gladys, okay? Mariah was diagnosed with ALS, given a year to live, and she lived for 37 years. There's a long backstory around it, okay? She lived for 37 years.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks.
Thank you, Ron. And today we would like to, you know, we were really moved with everything you are doing and everything we have heard. And as Everything ALS and also Peter Cohen Foundation, we would like to contribute $10,000 to your organization. So, so we want this community to benefit from, you know, everything you are providing. So yeah, we would love to be part of your community and help you in any way possible. So we would like to give. Thank you.
Indu, thank you so much. And let me just say this, for any of you that call, we'll do our very, very best. Or you can email, just give us some time. I mean, you know, because of COVID, I was getting ready to hire 2 or 3 more people. And, but we continue to grow and we'll reach out and again, check out our website. We'll do our very best. Thank you, Hindu.
Thank you. And we'll move to our question and answer session. And like we said, you know, please ask any question. And on to the next session would be, we have Lisa, who introduced yourself, and Tara Tadimala, who is actually, she's a pre-med student and now just graduated, going into medical school. And she will be asking questions to Ron and Don. And like we said, you know, keep it interactive. I see that on the chat, there's a lot of questions being answered already by people, and we like that. It's a community effort. So if there's any questions, please do ask, and might be other people know in your community, or Ron or Don, one of us will answer. So with that, Tara is also my niece, and I'll hand it over to Lisa and Tara to go through the questions.
Okay, great. Thank you again, both Don and Ron. I really enjoyed everything you guys had to share with the patients and their families. And after going through the journey, I wish I could have heard this call way back then. But let's get started. We want to be respectful of everybody's time. We do have some questions. And the first one, I'd like to ask, and this is just somebody wanted to remain anonymous. So how do you, this would be for Ron. So how do you deal with when you are ready for help, but your partner, your husband or your wife is not ready to receive help and they're the ones with ALS? So how, is there any tips you can give for that type of situation?
Yeah, that can be really tricky for sure. At some point, I think you have to come to a place of, honey, I can't do this anymore by myself. You know, oftentimes what will happen with us is I'll have a conversation, if this is the wife, I mean, we'll support her, alrighty? Because, I mean, sometimes it does happen where the individual with ALS doesn't want any support, so we're supporting the caregiver. And, you know, at some point, it can really get just to that place of, I need help. I'm going to get support for myself. All righty. I was with a family yesterday, and the gentleman not only has ALS, but he's got some FTD and some other neurological things going on. And they needed a great deal of things, and they'd already started with a few, but there's so much more they needed. He'd already fallen and really hurt himself. And so he was an accident waiting to happen. And yet the wife, God bless her, lovely lady, was just really resistant for saying yes to something that would make their life a lot easier. And so in a relationship, husband, wife, partners, all you can do is, you know, your best. Sometimes it takes a third party. You know, if I'm sitting with them, I'm going to let them know, one, there's no way your wife can take care of you by yourself, you know? And at the same time, it's a matter of just getting to them in some way. You know, we have people that don't want to meet, fine, and meet us. And it's like, gosh, why didn't we meet you before? Well, you didn't want to already, because people have this expectation. And what's happening for some that don't want assistance is fear that Don was talking to. And especially for a lot of men, you know, we're the warrior, we're the provider. And, you know, I've seen many who have been able to overcome that. Thank goodness. When they see that we're actually really nice people and we're just trying to support them, and that we can enhance the quality of his life. By enhancing the quality of his life, we're enhancing the quality of the family's life, her life, his wife's.
Thank you so much.
I hope that helped. Feel free to reach out.
Thank you.
We can talk more about that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So once again, my name's Tara Tadimala. Don, we have a question for you. Since there's so much stress involved in ALS, what is your most successful stress reducer technique?
So the question is a simple tool that can help people shift stress. One of the things I would say at the front of that is it's piggybacking on what Ron said early in this talk, is that it's important to be in touch with what your experience is. And so the kind of meditation that allows you to be with whatever is. You know, as I said, I got to this point of not being afraid of being afraid, not being stressed by being stressed. And there's a way in which a meditation can take you through that, where basically all you really do, you know, meditation in its most fundamental form is relaxation. So it's a question of sitting back, relaxing, being comfortable in your body, and then beginning to become aware of what's going on. What's going on in your mind, what's going on in your body, what's going on in your imagination, and let everything be as it is. You know, nothing to change, nothing to fix, and to watch as the content comes and goes. And what you'll find if you do that for about 20 minutes is that you're becoming more and more in touch, more and more aware of what is, and you're more and more able to be in the present moment. And this simple act of awareness can have a really powerful effect on you. And so the whole stress that comes in when I'm feeling afraid, I don't want to feel afraid, it amplifies your fear. It makes your fear worse. And then if you then become frustrated with that, well, then that frustration amplifies it even more. And the way in which it begins to quiet down is when you allow it. You allow what is. You're not in an argument or conflict with what is, because being in conflict with what is stressful, is by its very nature stressful. And through your act of simply allowing things to be exactly the way they are, accepting them exactly the way they are, your emotional state, your physical state, whatever is going on, you'll begin to notice over a period of 10, 15 minutes of meditating in that way, you begin to calm down. And you do this over a period of weeks, and there's a space that begins to open up inside of you. The space is basically called awareness. We often think we have this personality. This is me. I'm Don. And, Don's here, and he's using awareness. Well, you do this meditation long enough, you begin to find out that there's something behind Don, and it's this state of awareness. And it's spacious, and it's quiet, and it's peaceful, and you begin to, your ability to begin to quiet yourself down into a point of stillness, peace and quiet. What begins to arise is are things inside of you that usually elude us, but they're very natural. Things like peace, things like joy, things like happiness. A tool that I can give you that's a real quick tool for when you're beginning to stress, this tool is tied to the information I gave you, is that we think our way into all kinds of stressful situations. Our thoughts paint us into a corner. And of course, what happens is these thoughts, they trigger emotion, and they trigger pretty upsetting emotions coming out of a part of the brain called the amygdala, the brain's fear center. And so as that happens, what we perceive is a threatening world, and that's stressful. We begin to start to have a stress reaction, and then what happens is that the brain, the whole stress response system dumps stress hormones into your system, one of them being adrenaline, and now you're not only stressed, but you're amplified stressed. And so if you can break the pattern, you can break the stress reaction. You got 90 seconds. It's called the 90-second window. Is your brain gives you 90 seconds to intervene before it's just going to dump a ton of stress hormones in. And the other thing you got to understand about the amygdala, it's a very primitive part of the brain. It doesn't have intelligence that we think of as intelligence. Its intelligence is reactive. It's a very fast reactive. And so one of the things about the amygdala is that it can't tell the difference between a real and present danger and one you've made up in your head. So it's like the old archetype of a rattlesnake coiled and a hose coiled. Sometimes you look at if you live in snake country like I did you would get stress reactions, immediate stress reactions. But your brain can't tell the difference. That part of your brain can't tell the difference. It's going to set one off. But you've got 90 seconds to bust that. And there's a tool that has tested out pretty well. It's called the clear button. So I'll take you all through it. So kind of mimic me as I take you through it. So hold your hand up at the center of your palm, right in here. See this V? Index finger and the third finger? There's an indentation just below it. Press that. That's actually an acupuncture point. An acupuncture point that's used to lower people's blood pressure. It's called the fire point, all right? And so you press this. So now imagine you're having a stress reaction. Something's happened that stressed you. Something's come up that scared you. You've embellished it with your thinking. Imagine you go to the mailbox and there's a letter from the IRS, and your heart starts pounding. You start imagining everything. So you press this part of your button. You imagine it's going to send a signal down this meridian up into your brain. And that signal is going to calm things down. And then what you do is you count to 3, thinking of each number as a color, and it doesn't matter what color you choose. So press this button, take in a breath, On the inhale, count 1. And on the exhale, think red. Take a second breath. On the inhale, count 2, still pressing. On the exhale, think blue. Again, doesn't matter what color. Take a third breath. Take it in, count 3. And on the exhale, think blue. Now, you can let go of your pressing, and for a moment, just let your mind go completely blank. Wipe the slate clean. Don't think anything. Just be still. And after a moment, come back into yourself, come back into your heart, and ask yourself, what is it that I want to experience? And make the room for yourself to experience that. And I guarantee you, you won't choose fear. And the reason that this tool works is that this ancient part of the brain, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, it's fully developed in a human being by the age of 2. That's why you see, the terrible 2s throwing tantrums, because that part of the brain's really in charge when the apple cart gets upset. When a child its needs aren't getting met, it goes into a stress reaction and screams, right? That's the part that's in charge of you, actually, when you're in a full-blown stress reaction. That's why sometimes we say about somebody who just blew a 50-amp fuse, you say they acted like a 2-year-old. Well, that's accurate neurologically. And so what you do with a child, when a child's in the throes of a tantrum, for example, you distract them. You don't reason with them. You don't give them the lecture like I gave at the beginning of this. That's not going to go anywhere with a 2-year-old. You distract them. You give them a toy. You give them a juice. What you're doing with the pressing of the finger, as well as the counting and the colors, you're distracting your 2-year-old of your brain away from taking your thinking seriously. And you'll notice you begin to quiet down. Your thinking pattern's been busted. And as you let your mind go blank, now you've returned yourself to choice. And that's where that question comes up. What is it that I want to experience? What is it that I want to experience? And I would also underline one thing I said to you when you're using this tool. Remember that study. It's a landmark study. 85% of what people worry about never happens. And of the 15% that does, 79% of the time, they work things out just fine. That means that 97% of the time when you're worried, there's nothing to worry about. But you set off a stress reaction even so. And 40% of Americans worry throughout the day. 40%, 4 in 10 of us. So this is a way of being the 6 in 10 who are more optimistic in the way in which their mind is working.
Thank you, Don. I have one more question from our chat. How can we adjust our mindset to be more positive after receiving a diagnosis of ALS from a neurologist?
Well, one of the things you're going to experience, just as Ron had said, is when you get diagnosed, it's going to terrify you. There's going to be a period of time in which you are going to have to process that. And if you have a lot, and don't try to process that alone. That's what I did. I tried to process it alone. I ended up in terror. So you can actually get to a place with your fear, as I described in the story I told, where you allow it. You don't embellish it with your thinking, because that'll amplify it. We multiply the smallest matter with our thinking, particularly when we're afraid. And so you acknowledge, you allow yourself to be in fear. You're in fear. You feel it. You'll feel your heart beating really fast. You'll feel your mind racing. Your breathing's rapid. You just stay with it. You breathe with it. Breathe into it. Let it be. And I remember the first time somebody told me how to do this, they said, and it will pass. Well, what happened with me when I did it the first time, it amplified. When I let go into it, it really got really, really big. And I managed somehow to keep breathing with it, to become as big as it was, at least in terms of my allowance of it. And then something really miraculous happened. It disappeared. And it was the first time in my life that I realized what I've been reading from the mystics all along, that fear is illusion. I got a direct experience that it was illusion. So just allow what is to be, whatever your experience to be. Don't be afraid of it. Go into it. It will pass. Everything passes. Ultimately we pass, but especially emotions. Emotions are very ephemeral. They come and go. If you just will stick with them, but when you compress, when you contract with an emotion, it gets bigger. When you open to it and allow it, it has a way of passing on through, of moving on through. If you contract with it, it hits trigger points. And I think Ron was talking about, we have all these unworthiness issues. We have all these past traumas. Well, when you contract fear, whatever form it's taking at a time, it hits those buttons. It activates your emotional memory, and you start seeing things, that it's activating in your brain. And when that happens, just allow that to happen, and it'll pass. It'll flow through. So what you've done is you turn this contraction into an expansion, and instead of getting triggered, you had an experience of it just passing on through, flowing on through, and leaving you now a choice. And then it's time to ask yourself, what do I want to experience in this here and now moment now?
If I can add something to that, Don, don't be in a hurry. I was telling you about my friend Mariah. She went home, literally locked herself in her room for 2 weeks. In many ways became her own client. True story. And then, after 2 weeks, she came downstairs, found her to-be husband, and said, we're going to live our life. And, it doesn't go away, but we learn to live with it. In many ways, we're all living our dying right now, with ALS or without ALS. So it's about feeling into it, paying attention to those feelings and emotions. But this can be really hard for a lot of us. So that's why it's important to maybe have that support, because oftentimes you're going to be engaged with your friends, and you've all had that experience. What can I do? What can I do? People wanting to help. And that can get really old really quick, right? So it's just be gentle with yourself and find some way to lean into it. And because this is the reality of my circumstance, do not give up on faith. Do not give up on your hope. I mean, lightning can come down right now and take me, right? So it's about living life.
Don, does cranial sacral therapy harm or help with ALS?
I'm going to say it helps a great deal. Okay, because I've had a lot of people. It's something that we offer. Go ahead, Don.
No, I would say the same thing. It helps with a lot of things, but it's a good therapy. Reiki therapy.
Finding the right cranial sacral therapist. Yeah.
Thank you very much. This was an excellent session, and there was so much you guys shared, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more questions from the community, and if you don't mind, we will share them with you, and we'll keep this as an active engagement, and we're really, really, really honored to have you guys.
Send email to Don and also Ron at Compassionate Care for ALS at this contact information.